Greetings, Internet, and welcome to episode 89 of the Comic Watchers Show. I'm your host, Matt. With me, as ever, are Nick and Mike. Gentlemen, how are we this week?
We're good. Not bad. Kind of humid over here on the east, but it's good.
Cool.
So hot and humid in Texas, but doing good.
It's Texas. It's America's
hot and humid in Chicago, too, I gotta say.
Woo! Yes, we are honored this week to have writer-artist Daniel Warren Johnson of Wonder Woman, Dead Earth, and Murder Falcon fame with us this week. Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here. It's blast.
Yeah, dude. I'm truly honored to get a little bit of time to talk with you. So we're gonna make the most of it, and just roll deep in this thing. So I gotta say, I became aware of your work last year with Murder Falcon, and followed you into Wonder Woman Dead Earth at DC, which I believe is your first work for the big two. What that's a pretty meteoric rise, though, because before that, I mean, you had Extremity and Space Mullet, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that's about it. But what's it like right now for you, man?
Oh, man. Well, you know, it's funny. How do I put this? So, I mean, my goal ever since the beginning was to write and draw my own stories, and to kind of be that one-man show, I guess. So it just kind of happened that, you know, I was just kind of doing my own thing, and I started getting noticed by other companies, you know, bigger companies like DC. And then when DC reached out to me, I kind of, at first, you know, I was like, I don't know, I'm not sure about this. I didn't know if it was going to be a good fit, honestly, because I've never worked with characters like that before, where I've done a few like little one-shots here and there for DC and for Marvel and stuff, but I've never written anything. I've always just kind of been the vessel to tell the story. And, you know, it was getting to the point where I was getting offers from Marvel, because I knew more people at Marvel before Wonder Woman came along. I didn't really have any contacts at DC, but Marvel was offering me pretty regular like one-shots and little mini-series that was being written by other people. And I said, no, I really appreciate the offer of the work, but unless you have something for me to write and draw, you know, I'm really not very interested. And so they were cool, but they didn't really have anything for me at the time. And that's right around the time when DC reached out. My editor, Andy Curry, just kind of emailed me, and he's like, hey, you know, I want to work with you. What do you think? I was like, cool, let's do Dial H for Hero, X-rated. He's like, that won't sell. Let's pick something else.
I would buy it.
Right? Yeah. Like, I mean, I remember because my dad would like get me Dial H for Hero because he like would flip through all the old comics, and it was the one with the least amount of punching in it. So my dad is not a fan of violence, nor am I, but, you know, especially in comics, he just like did not like it at all. So he would like, he brought it over. He's like, this one is really good. I think it's really interesting. And I thought it was the lamest thing ever. But now looking back on it, it's aged quite well. And I would love to do a like crazy violent, you know, X-rated one. Anyway, DC, there you go. There's an idea for you.
Move over, Sam Humphries.
Yeah, seriously. So honestly, you know, it was really kind of a, if you hear like noises, that's my daughter playing upstairs with blocks. But, you know, everything kind of came into fruition at the right time, I guess. So honestly, like I was working on Space Mullet, and then I immediately started working on the Ghost Fleet with Donny Cates. And then I worked on this book called Alabaster. And then right from there, I basically went straight into Extremity, and then right from Extremity right into Murder Falcon, you know, less than a month break each time. And same deal with Wonder Woman, you know, less than a month break, and just dived head first. So it's been kind of a whirlwind, honestly, like an 8-year whirlwind, and I can't complain. But yeah.
Dude, that's awesome. Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely has been a meteoric rise, and like digging through your stuff, I immediately noticed that you do writing and artwork, and that's super awesome. But I kind of wanted to dig in on how you got started working with Mike Spicer and Russ Wooten, because that team you see kind of follows through some of these books, and I really dig that vibe that y'all kind of all capture together.
Oh, thanks, man. Well, it was kind of it was lucky. So a few things happened. So I have this Skype group that they're kind of like my coworkers. I talk to them every day. I'll just have them on in the background as I draw, and we'll talk about anything and nothing and all at the same time. But Brian Level is a friend of mine. He's on there, and so we had our eye on a colorist before I'd even started drawing Extremity, and we reached out to him, and he colored the entire first issue of Extremity, but then he kind of went AWOL email wise. And we were like, hey, how's issue 2 coming along? And we weren't really getting any updates, and so I'm pretty sure he had a lot of work with DC at the time. So I won't say who it was, because they're a great colorist, and it's just scheduling mishaps and stuff. But we had to start looking for another colorist, and Brian was like, "Hey, have you considered this guy Mike Spicer?" And he was sending me a bunch of like samples that Mike had done, I think for Boom Studios at the time, not sure, but I was like, "Dang, this guy can color." And so Skybound asked him to color maybe like the first like 3 or 4 pages as just a tryout, see if it was a good fit, and he killed him. And we were so happy with what he'd done that we just invited him onto the project right then and there. And I believe Skybound had already a pretty good working relationship with Russ, and they just kind of said, "Hey, we're gonna have Russ, letter your book." And I was like, "That sounds great to me." But Russ has been great. I actually brought him in to do some of his first DC work over at Dead Earth. So I remember we were talking. I think we met for the first time at either San Diego or New York Comic-Con. I can't remember which one, but I was chatting with him, and he's like, I've never actually worked for DC, and I was like, we got to change that. But yeah, I mean, they're kind of my go-to team. They're awesome, and especially so with Wonder Woman Dead Earth, DC is great. They're fantastic to work for. I love hanging out with them. The editorial's great, but it does take a long time for things to get greenlit there. You'll get like a yellow light for months on end, and sometimes it ends up being a red light. So I pitched Wonder Woman Dead Earth quite early on in a year, in 2019? Was that how? Yeah. Early last year, I basically pitched them my Wonder Woman idea, and they didn't really sign off on it until like San Diego Comic-Con. And they wanted it to come out in December, for like financial numbers reasons or whatever, which is fine. But then I was just drawing my ass off for like 6 months. And I wouldn't say that I was rushing, but because I'm proud of what I've done. But, especially with the bigger format, I was a little nervous because also my general style, you'll notice like Extremity has like a crap ton of lines in it. And Murder Falcon is a bit of a departure from that. It's a little more gestural. And that's just a natural progression for me as an artist. I had a baby in February 2018, and I was working on issue 2 at the time when I had the baby. And then when I started going in, I was behind. With the schedule, so I was just trying to like figure out, okay, I'm a new dad, and I don't have as much time as I used to have. I need to learn how to draw just as cool in a quicker amount of time. So it's actually been really healthy for me, trying to figure out how to be gestural and detailed at the same time and make it look natural. And Wonder Woman Dead Earth is just an extension of that. So I was a little nervous, maybe thinking people would think it was like too messy, and I'm sending in this line art that's very gestural and very sketchy, and I don't think it's bad, but it's, I'm just kind of coming into my own as an artist a little more with each project. And Mike just made it gel so perfectly. Like there were pages that I honestly was really frustrated with that I love now because Mike took them and just kicked his ass. So, Mike, thank you.
Our Mike, go ahead.
Hey, our Mike.
Mike.
Even, Daniel,
have we met in person before? I just can't remember.
It's probably the beard. It's fine. I get that all the time.
Okay.
No, and keep
confused for Reed Richards.
Reed Richards question, sir. But no, in keeping with the topic of your art, I noticed, or at least I get a feeling, there's a beautiful creepiness to your art, especially in Dead Earth. Even with Murder Falcon and Extremity, there's times where even with like panels where there's no words and it's just the art, it's just the pictures, and you feel it, that it's speaking to you. You don't necessarily need any dialogue. Has that always been your approach to your art, or was that something that you kind of, as you talked about, growing into and Dead Earth being an extension of that, did that just kind of, was that like a happy accident, or was that something that you just grew into?
Well, I had a professor in college. I went to North Park University in Chicago, and it was not it was a liberal arts school. It wasn't really like a fine arts school. So there wasn't a lot of like technical classes. I mean, there was technical drawing and painting classes, but the focus was more about, almost more like in the art field of college and stuff. Usually your 4 years is basically like how to draw as well and paint as well as possible technically. And then in grad school, you're kind of more examining like, okay, what is this about? Like why do you make things? And North Park just kind of focused on like the grad school element of it, right? So I was in a 4-year school, but they didn't necessarily have the resources, the faculty to like really highlight that kind of really technical training that I was maybe looking for. But one thing that it really gave me was like a sense of like, okay, why am I doing this? How am I doing this? Like, what am I trying to say about the world, about myself, blah, blah, blah. And my professor, Tim Lowley, he's a fantastic painter. He doesn't know a thing about comics, but he'd always get really frustrated with me because I'd be like drawing zombies and stuff and gore and guts and everything. And, he doesn't like violence to begin with, but he'd be like, dude, it's fine if you want to draw zombies, but you got to give me a reason. Like, like if you just draw zombies just to be cool, like just to have fun, it's like, that's not bad. It's just like, what are you saying about everything? Like, you need to have a purpose. And that really stuck with me. I got frustrated at first because I'm like, I just want to draw some zombies, man. Whatever. What's the big deal? He's like, that's the thing. It's not a big deal. It's like, if you want to see change, you gotta, in like yourself and in other people, and if you want to like affect the world in a real way, there's not like, if you're going to use zombies as the vessel to say something, that's fine, but you got to be saying something. And so I was like, okay. And so I started like trying to dive into more of my narrative work and like explore, and this is like very messy, like very like embarrassing, like you don't want to see the comics I made in college because you will cringe. not necessarily because they're drawn badly, it's just like I like wear my heart on my sleeve so like profusely, it's embarrassing. It's just what it is. It's embarrassing. So I remember showing it to my professors, Tim especially, saying, you know what, like if you were to take all of this dialogue out, because there was a lot of friggin' dialogue, it's like I would understand exactly what you were saying, and honestly it probably would be more powerful. And I just kind of experimented. I took that project that I had made and showed my professor, and I just got rid of all the words and just whited it out, and gosh darn it, he was right. And I've found that there's something, I mean, words and language can be universal, but they're not nearly, in my opinion, they're not nearly as universal as pictures. And there's a reason, like one of my favorite panels in the universe is from Nausicaa Valley of the Wind, where the main character is just embracing her soldiers after they've all thought that she passed away in battle. And there's no words, they're just gathered around her and they're hugging her, and it just like really gets me. But there's no words, and I feel like it's always my goal to do less with the words and do more with the pictures, and problem solve and tell stories through pictures and through images, because it's just so much easier. There's less noise for me to get from here to like you guys or whoever might be reading. That has now become kind of a goal. And I actually, when I write full scripts before I draw anything. I don't break down panels or anything, but page by page I'll have the dialogue pretty much set, and like I'll go through and I'll take out at least 20% of the dialogue after it's all lettered. Thank you, Russ. I'm sorry. I'll be like, Russ, cut this, because it just does, like, as you're reading it and you're in the experience, you're like, wow, I don't need any of this. Like,
Yeah.
where are we going? We're going to that building. Okay, that's all we need to say. Don't need to say anything else. So yeah, that's a very long answer to your question.
Nice. No, it comes across great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, keeping on track with your art style
Yeah.
a little bit, I'm curious who your influences are, because one of the first things I thought when I first encountered your work was a little bit of Jeff Darrow, because of the highly detailed backgrounds and the deceptively simple foreground figures that sort of play off of each other. And I just curious who's influenced you a little bit.
It's funny that you mentioned Jeff Darrow, because remember, like, I don't know when you guys started reading comics, but when I was growing up, it was very hard to get like collected comic books like in the 90s.
Yes.
Like they existed, but there was no real section in like the bookstore. And then like I remember my library, like some of the first comics they had was like Calvin and Hobbes and like Ranma 1/2, which is like such a weird combo. But then one of the new books they got was Hard Boiled, that big magazine size one.
Yup.
Yeah, and I remember reading that, and my mind just like blah blah blah. So it's a very early on in my life, like I think I was maybe 10 or 11 that I saw that, and it didn't really register to me just how amazing it was. But as I grew older, I kept going back to his work, to Jeff Darrow's work, and the obsessive amount of detail. I don't think I take the style of line very. I don't think I'm not drawing so much from his style of line, but his attitude about how he approaches a page, I think, has definitely had an effect on
the
me.
spirit of it.
Yes, the spirit. That's a great way to put it. Because, like, dude, he's like drawing every single dinosaur scale. Like, when you're like, and I do not do that. Like, I like, and then I'm done. But I am like faking my way. I'm like fake Jeff Darrow. So yeah, but Jeff is a huge part of it. And then as far as other definitely, it's right here. I'll show you. Oh my god, it's so heavy. Might as well. Oh, Dark Knight Returns, baby. Frank Miller. This is my boy. Yeah, it does not go far. This will cost me a pretty penny, but it's worth it. And then I also have David Macuzelli's Born Again Artist Edition right next to my desk. So here's my, this is my guitar, but there's my desk over there, and then right down here are my like just stacks of artist editions that I just will look at when I'm feeling like I don't have the juice. So,
man, that's awesome and good reference. My God.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's like when I was like devout, like when I was especially I got a lot of these books at the library, like Dark Knight Returns, Batman Year One, and I like read them millions of times. And then I went to college, and I had read them so many times in middle school and high school. I was like looking for new things, and that's when I found like Mike Mignola and Appleseed. Like I was reading a lot more manga at that time, like manga from like the 80s and 90s, not so much the modern day manga at the time, which was like 2005 to 2009. And then as I started getting back into like drawing comics for real in like 2012, I started coming back to these greats and just realizing just like how much of an effect like David Machiavelli had on me, like just reading Year One, like those the SWAT team outfits in Year One. That's just my shit, dude. Like, I love that.
Yes,
I'm really into it. So I mean, like, and obviously that's the goal, right? Like, and I'm trying to bring that level of like intensity and storytelling with the dynamics of like manga, which Masamune Shiro, Atomo, probably more Shiro than Atomo, because if you look at like Appleseed and Ghost in the Shell, like all the backgrounds are basically hand done. Like you can barely see a ruler in there.
Yeah.
And if you see some of the art like blown up, like it's wobbly. Like it's just because it's shrunk down so much that it looks so good. So yeah, if I was to pick one manga artist, it would definitely be Masamune Shiro for sure.
Awesome.
Very cool. And
Yeah.
I couldn't help but notice the Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind reference. Are you a Miyazaki fan? Has that level of animation or that kind of intensity influenced your work?
Yeah, I think there's a mixture of like. So I got to be honest, like a lot of manga, even like Miyazaki stuff, there's like an element of Japanese storytelling that I feel like maybe goes over my head as an American or something. Like just their style of storytelling is so different than ours. So sometimes there are these narrative choices that I'm just a little bit like, and it does pull me out of it a little bit. But if I'm able to like turn my brain off in that sense, like, and just learn, like let the media wash over me, that's when I can really appreciate, like Miyazaki's work the best. And one of the reasons that I love Nausicaa so much is that it has such like a universal human element to it. And it's so magical and it's drawn so well. And I'm pretty sure that he penciled like 99% of Nausicaa Valley of the Wind. Like he made it just with a mechanical pencil. And he did like the Frank Quietly thing where he just like digitally darkened it.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So there's a little Miyazaki factoid for you.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I was like, oh man, what kind of nib are you using? But it turns out he's just using a pencil. Good for him.
Have you had like any influences from Junji Ito or stuff like that? Because I noticed in Dead Earth the dynamics of some of the action scenes and some of the gestural stuff that you had mentioned, it really does lend itself towards that manga style in some of the more exaggerated senses, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, I haven't really actually read any Genji Ito. I've read a lot of Kentaro Muria's Berserk.
Oh, my heart.
Yeah, right. Are you a fan?
I guess if someone's a fan of Berserk.
yeah, it's pretty brutal.
It is. It's so brutal.
Yeah, like it is like next level. It's
yeah.
I think it's really good, but it's not exactly like a fun read.
You got to prepare yourself for something like that.
Yeah, no spoilers or anything, but I remember there was a creator at San Diego Comic-Con. We were hanging out at a party, and I told him that I was like reading Berserk, and he's like, dude, that book will F you up. And I was like, ha 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 ha. He's like, no, seriously, that book is gonna like mess with you. It killed me. And I was like, and then sure enough, I got to like volume 12 or 13 or wherever that crap goes down, and I was shaking. Yeah, it really affected me. So there is something about his art style that is so visceral that like I definitely was trying to channel in Dead Earth, but it's like so far away from me as a person that like I don't think I necessarily got there.
I dig it, yeah.
But one thing that like, so you know, when like looking at all the old greats of manga and stuff, like Otomo and Shiro and everybody and Miyazaki, like for the most part, their sense of anatomy was still like very like pretty traditional, I guess. Like there'd be some stretching, you know, some movement of the forms, but not crazy. Then you read stuff like oh man, I'm not pronouncing it right, but there's a boxing manga, no Ippo. I don't know how to pronounce the whole title, so I can't pronounce it, but it's over here somewhere. Actually, I'll just get it for you. One sec. Might as well. It's a video podcast, so if you can't tell, my office is incredibly messy. So this is like a best of, and like you see this like, you know, this like crazy like movement and dynamic action in a way that you don't necessarily see in some of the older school stuff. I'm trying to find more examples, stuff like this where I'm trying to channel like, you know, how many different ways can you draw somebody punching somebody else? I mean, it starts getting old really fast.
I really noticed it in Wonder Woman versus Superman. I kind of, it really started to click there. I said, I've seen this before. I'm not sure where, but that was some interesting influence for sure.
It's definitely more manga oriented, especially my action scenes. And I'm really interested in starting to I'm really actively trying to like push what we understand as like acceptable like anatomy. Like I'm willing to really push it and really get dynamic with it, and especially in action scenes, because it's like, when else are you gonna be able to get away with that kind of thing?
Right.
And it's based in the, like, you know, if I need to draw somebody standing still smoking a cigarette, like I can kill that, but I also want to have somebody like go crazy, and have someone, you know, it's like in 2D art, like this is something that like only we as artists can do. Like to like make magic and like make things stretch. And you see in like Calvin and Hobbes, when like Hobbes tackles Calvin, you know, his body just goes whoosh. It's so cool. You know, it's so it looks so effortless. So
Yeah.
I was trying to go for that a lot in Murder Falcon. There's a panel of Jimmy hitting a snare, and her arm is like bent like way out, and it doesn't really work, but I tried. So, you know, day by day.
Hey, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, Dan, you were talking about like pushing the envelope and kind of, you know, your dynamics and stuff. How much freedom were you given with Dead Earth? Because you see like characters, how your take on Hippolyta with kind of taking a protective role over Diana. You see Cheetah and how you almost kind of like redid, you know, Cheetah. And earlier you talked about a long green light with DC. So when you finally got the project greenlit and everything, did they just kind of like leave you alone, or was it kind of like, did you have like a little editor on your shoulder going, yes, no, maybe could you kind of push this over? Can you color it differently? I mean, obviously, you know, you can't tell all the trade secrets, but like how much true freedom? Because there's stuff in all three issues at Dead Earth that just, when you read them, even when you reread them, you almost find yourself going, I didn't see that last time. Oh, I didn't see this last time. You know, and it's just so. The three issues are just amazing so far. I'm just curious of how much freedom that DC was like, you know what, just do what you do and produce a book.
Well, thank you for that. I will. So my editor Andy, awesome guy, awesome editor. It is a different animal, especially when starting out. A lot more notes that, you know, to me, you know, I would be like, this is, I don't like this. Wah, wah, wah. But then you get over it and you figure out a way to make it work. And honestly, all things considered, I didn't get that many notes. When it came to like the actual structure of the story, Andy was, you know, I think in a lot of ways, Andy really fought for the book, because I'm not dealing with like the DC hierarchy. I'm just talking with my editor, Andy. Okay. And there were a few times where he was like, look, there's some battles I can win, and then like there's some battles I cannot win. This is one of those battles. Like, he just let me know, and I'm like, all right. And we would brainstorm together like a way to figure out how to make it work. So props to Andy for that. This, you know, it's weird. It's just a different game. It's not one that's it's not necessarily any worse or better. I would say ultimately it is more fulfilling to work on my own projects and my own characters and my own stories. But I like to, when I'm like explaining this, I like to think like when you go into like a it's like, imagine you have like a box which says toys in it, and you're gonna play with these toys, and you open up the Wonder Woman toy box, and you have all these characters, and like the Invisible Jet and like Pegasus. There are all these toys that are already in the box. You can just start, you know, hanging out with them and like figuring out how they work. And the world has been set up for your success, like, because a lot of that heavy lifting of the something from nothing has been erased. You know, it's just, there's already so much there. When you're making your own project, it's like you go to this toy box that says toys on it, but there's nothing in the box. And you have to just like, okay, here we go. I'm going to make this toy and it's going to be awesome, right? And here you go. And in a lot of ways, it's magic, you know, because it's like you are literally like, you know, okay, here's this thing. It's really cool. So anytime I see somebody making something new from their head, you know, from toddler to 60 years old, I really try and praise it and applaud it, because no matter where you're at in life, I mean, it is friggin' hard to do. Sure. I wish it wasn't, but it is, you know, and it's just the way it is. So in that way, working on Wonder Woman was like almost a break, if that makes sense. Like,
right,
there's less of my heart in it. I'm bringing my best to the table, but
Sure.
it's like there's just the grind of figuring out new characters and how they interact with each other and all this stuff is not there. So that's like the really positive. And then like the not so positive part is like, yeah, there's some times where I have to be like, I got to deal with this. But that's, you know, like any job. And a lot of times it would be like really random things that I wouldn't think about. Like I remember one note was in this second issue, Wonder Woman's talking to the main human character D. She goes, I know this is hard for you to understand, but I'm a god. Like, you know, I have a different outlook. That's what the original script said. And Andy was like, hey, we can't have Wonder Woman saying she's a god. And I was like, what? But she is a god. You know, he's like, she can say, I am of the gods. And I was like, okay, fine. That's whatever. That'll work, right? So like workarounds, where things to me, I'm like, this doesn't matter, but to DC it matters. So there was a lot of back and forth about Wonder Woman punching Superman through the heart in issue 3. Spoiler alert, sorry. But there was a lot of gore, like a lot of gore. Like I pushed it, like big time, and we didn't get any notes until like basically the book was about to go to print, and he was like, "Look, I tried, but there's no stopping this train. Like they want it changed." So we like did like 2 or 3 more different iterations where like I broke it down panel by panel, and at first they said it was okay, and then they're like, actually no, it's still too violent. Which is funny, like my dad, you know, refusing to buy me violent comics, and here I am like drawing things that are too violent for DC editorial to handle. And so then eventually we settled on the silhouette you know, punch. And so that was probably the most frustrating part. I mean, it wasn't bad. You know, it just is what it is.
Sure.
And that's another thing. It's like they're not my characters, so you know, it's like what flag am I going to stick in this ground? You know, it's like, okay, well, we're gonna have a silhouette instead. And I couldn't believe they let me get away with the spine thing.
Right. Yeah.
Man, you're editing this, but not the spine thing. I am so lucky.
I was going to bring that up because that is so much. I'm going to remember that for years.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like every Wonder Woman fan will.
If that panel isn't tattoo worthy, I don't know like what. I mean, yeah.
I did the age old no of like going on Reddit and seeing like what people were saying about that issue, and like I feel like a fair amount of people are like, man, this is really cool. I'm going to check this out. And then the other half were like, this is disgusting.
Only people that say it's disgusting are the Superman fans. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, it was basically like Superman fans be like, I can't believe they did this to Superman. It's like,
don't worry about
it's not really about Superman. It's about Wonder Woman. It doesn't matter. This is hollowed ground. I'm like over here burning a Bible.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was pretty funny.
That's awesome.
So, moving backwards a little bit, if we could, I'd like to ask a little bit about some of your older work, Murder Falcon specifically, just because that there seems to be so much heart and soul put into that comic, and it really shows. Like it,
Man.
and we were just before you came on, Nick and I were talking about how at first it's kind of like this fun metal romp, right, and then it takes this really heartfelt turn midway through, and I've just got to know where the hell did this comic come from, because it's so unique.
Oh, thanks, dude.
Yeah.
Well, it all started with the name. I've told this story a bunch, so hopefully you haven't heard it yet. But
Nope.
Okay, cool. So my brother used to do roller derby in Massachusetts. Male roller derby is like a big thing up in the Northeast. And he made it onto the B team, so he was trying to come up with a cool name. So he's texting me all these roller derby names, right? Like Atom Bomb, or like but ADAM, and you know, puns, and like Andrew Lloyd Shredder, and Murder Falcon was one of them. So I texted him right back, and I was like, dude, you can't use Murder Falcon because I'm stealing that. And sure enough, that night I went to bed and I was like, Murder Falcon, Murder Falcon. This name is so good. What a great name. Like, this is the coolest name. I Googled it. There was no character or thing named Murder Falcon. A murder happened somewhere in a place called Falcon Lake that still has not been solved. But that's the only thing on Google. So I was like, okay. And I was just thinking, and I was like, I just got this new guitar. This is a Jackson Soloist neck through design. So there's a piece of wood. You can hear me. This neck, this is all one piece of wood.
Wow!
You get this really brunty kind of sound out of it.
Yeah.
It's heavy as hell. It's like 8 or 9 pounds. It's like almost as heavy as a Les Paul, and it's from 1988. And I saw this hanging up in the guitar store here in Chicago. And I was like, I have to have that guitar. But, it's a little out of my price range. And but at the time, I had been going through a lot of, like, health problems. And, like, nothing as bad as Jake went through, but a lot of, like, chronic pain, a lot of physical therapy, which was friggin' brutal. And as, like, a kind of, like, after clearing it with my wife, I was like, okay, if I sell some, like, of my old guitar gear, and I can like pay off half of it at the end of this physical therapy run, I'd like to get this for myself. And she's like, I approve that. So physical therapy ended and I got it. And it was just a huge part of my healing process. I know that's silly to compare it to a guitar.
No way.
Yeah. But so with all that, that was like, I don't remember. That was before Murder Falcon started getting made, but that was like early 2017. And, I was just thinking about, man, what would it be like if, like, because I loved this guitar so much, it got me through so much, and I was like, it's like the healing power of music. How could I channel that in visual form? What is Murder Falcon looking like? And I just connected the guitar with this image of like Murder Falcon, who's just like a anthropomorphic falcon that does kung fu. And I had just finished watching The Protector. I don't know if you guys have seen that movie. But the hero, it's like a kung fu movie, and the hero wears Chuck Taylors, and I just think it's the coolest thing ever. And so I like, he would have Chuck Taylors, and he would have a Ryu headband and a metal arm, because why not? And it was just like, I don't know, it was like the perfect storm. It all kind of came together. Hasn't happened before, hasn't happened since. And in figuring out the kind of story and like the arc of the story was another challenge. I was stuck for a little while, but the concept came to me basically in like one evening before bed. And like I was in bed about to fall asleep, and I wrote it down in my notebook, and then the rest was history, And when I pitched Skybound, I was like, hey, just so you know, I have this book. I said, they were like, hey, we would really like to work with you again. What do you think about what After Extremity? It's like, yeah, I mean, I'm really down. I loved working with you guys. And so my editor, Sean, was like, okay, well, we have this book. It's like sci-fi. We think you'd be a great fit to draw. It's like, well, I only want to write and draw my own stuff. I don't really want to draw anybody else's story. And he's like, okay, well, what did you have in mind? It's like, it's called Murder Falcon, and it's going to be the next book that I do. Whether it's at Skybound or somewhere else, like, this is the thing. And he's like, I dig it. Let's see what and so then I put together more of like an official pitch, and sent them some sample pages. And so Skybound is run by two people. You got this guy, Robert Kirkman, who runs it with David Alpert, who's kind of the media guy. He does like the Walking Dead show. He's like the Hollywood exec kind of producer type. Great dude. But I remember hearing the story that David was like, I don't know about this. I don't have, it'd be kind of hard to animate, if we wanted to turn this into a television show. And Robert was like, we're doing this book. So thank you, Robert Kirkman, for bringing Murder Falcon to life. We couldn't have done it without you.
Nice.
Yeah, so there's some inside baseball for you.
Dude, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
Yeah, so it was like a lot of different life things and, happy circumstances and just getting through some stuff, and Murder Falcon was born.
Well, we're all very happy and relieved that you got through your trials. So, well,
there's new trials every day. That was just one. But what I found was like like when making stories, like a lot of times you kind of have to have like at certain trials in your rear view mirror before you can start like processing and making new things out of them. So I was able to do that with Murder Falcon, thank goodness.
That's awesome. Nick?
Yeah, I'd like to dig in a little bit more about definitely your initiative to write and draw your own work. I feel like you hear a lot of people who are, really just excited to get in writing or just excited to get in drawing. And it seems like you've set some pretty high standards for your work in comics. And how has that journey been in sticking to your guns almost and saying, I want to write and draw my own work and tell my own stories?
That's a great question. I think, so when I was first starting to break in, I quit my teaching job in 2012, and the deal was with my wife that I would do as much. I would pay. The goal would be to try and pay for rent with only art for as long as possible. And if I couldn't do that for 3 months in a row, I had like 3 months to basically like figure out how to do it. Then I would like get a job at Starbucks or something, because I really didn't like teaching. It was kind of running me ragged. So I was just trying to get paid, right? So like I was doing everything. I was doing graphic design. Like I did zombie portraits like every October, where I'd like draw like likeness portraits of people in bars. And the longer the night would go on, the better my tips would get, And then like people would be carrying around their like portraits, and then there'd be like, I would be in like Wrigleyville, which is like the land of the bros. And they'd, have their girlfriend on their arm, and they're like, dude, can you have her like eating my face? And then I would draw him eating her face, and he's like, dude, this is fucking amazing. It's like, here's a $50 tip. You rock, man. You gotta have a card. And so it was like, it was actually awesome, right? Because like I'm making it sound like it was this silly thing, but actually it meant a lot to people, which was really fun. Even in the midst of like crazy Wrigleyville bar crawl, I was making some sort of like real connection with people, which was actually quite awesome. Anyway, so I would also do that at shows. And the whole idea was that I wasn't necessarily thinking, man, I'm going to break into comics. I just knew that I loved drawing. I had always wanted to do comics. I never really tried that hard to do them before. I'd done them a little bit in college, but nothing of big scale. So I was going breadth, not depth. I was, graphic design, zombie portraits, illustration. I did some commercial storyboards for a company, but this way I was able to make enough money to pay rent every month. And then what was paying me zero, but I just wanted to make sure and add it to that, breadth was making Space Mullet just for free, just to prove that I could do it. And that was just me like, I don't know if this is going to happen. I mean, I'm going to try it and then see if I can make something of it. Basically, I was like throwing my line into a million different oceans and seeing what would come back. And what I was finding was I'd be having these great experiences with illustration clients and storyboarding, but the jobs were so few and far between that I just, I was looking into the future. I'm like, this is not sustainable. So I didn't want to be like living that paycheck to paycheck. I wanted something a little more like steady. So I was starting to check as Space Mult was getting noticed. I was starting to get more and more in touch with like the comics industry, and I was like, man, it doesn't pay great, but there's more of the work to be had. So then I started going to Comic Cons, and I was like, well, I'll just see if people are interested in Space Mullet, and then I'll do zombie portraits on the side to help pay for the table. And as I was walking around, I started to like take stock of like who actually looked like they're having a good time at these shows. And obviously you can't get the gist of a person's career by seeing them at a show, but there'd be a lot of artists from the 80s and 90s that you could tell they're kind of just scraping by, and people may love their work, but their aesthetic has just kind of passed into history. Like the taste level has not necessarily risen with the changing times. It's just the way it is. It's any entertainment thing. But people who seem to have the respect of everybody in the industry, and B, were still getting jobs and looked like they were actually living relatively healthily, and I talked to them and they did not seem like a husk of a person, was the artist that write and draw. And so I just saw that and I was like, man, I want to be able to do this as long as possible. So I started modeling that. And the goal at first was to make money, but as soon as I was able to, and one of the reasons that I went with Skybound is that they were going to give me a chance to do both, whereas nobody was going to had done that yet. And I was just getting by with working for other writers. And I had a great time working with Donnie, but then I worked with the writer on Alabaster, which was really tough and kind of like killed my love of comics a little bit. I had to find that love by doing Green Leader, that like little mini comic. Mm-hmm. And after that, I was like, you know what? I just got to do my own thing. I have to try and do my own thing. So I started working on a pitch, and I pitched to Skybound, and one thing led to another. And so I'm not going to say that I'll never work with a writer again, because obviously I need to pay for my family, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. But while I have the ability and while the desire is there, I'm happy to do my own thing and write and draw my own thing. It's just, that's what fills me up. It's what keeps me going. So, yeah. And it's nice when there's not as many cooks in the kitchen, because it's just I can do my thing and people kind of know what I'm about, and it's just it feels good, and hopefully I can do it for a long time.
Dude, respect. I love that story.
Right on.
Man. So, well, so we've got, and I know we're kind of bumping up the edge of our time here, so I don't want to get too deep in the weeds or anything. Cool. But I know Dead Earth #4 has been pushed back to October. I assume that's coronavirus related.
Yes.
Yeah. As are all things these days. Right, yeah. Right.
At least it's coming out. We weren't sure if issue 3 was going to come out for a while. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man, but what's in the future for you? What's coming up after Dead Earth? Is there anything you can talk about yet?
No, I can't talk about any of it. It sucks because I haven't actually signed contracts for anything, but things are in the works. I've got some creator-owned things. I had this sci-fi creator-owned thing that I was working really hard on once the pandemic hit, and I was like, I need to figure out what's going to be next. And this is when we didn't know what was going to happen with Diamond or comics or anything. So it was kind of like panicky creation, which is never a good thing. So that didn't, I didn't even really pitch it around officially. I just wasn't feeling it. So I had to put that on the shelf, which sucked. It was almost like I was laying a person to rest. I'm sure I'll come back to it, but that was really tough. That was a tough lesson to learn. But I started working on another creator-owned thing. I've been talking with both of the big two about a new possible project. We'll see. But nothing's set in stone, so I can't say anything publicly.
Understandable.
But there are things in the works.
I would buy a Wolverine comic written and drawn by you, and
I would write and draw Wolverine. I'd love to do Weapon X, a direct sequel to Weapon X. I'm sure that's already been done, but
just take my money already.
Right. Yeah, just Wolverine kills 3 bears. Nice. Just one bear fight scene. Marvel will love that.
Hey, I'll buy it.
Right. I would definitely buy that.
Oh
man. So music obviously factors pretty heavily into your who you are and as just as a person and as a creator, and obviously it's there throughout Murder Falcon and freaking metal and this. It's hard to not read Dead Earth and be like, whoa, this is so metal. Well, I mean, what is it about heavy music, man, that does it for you?
Man, so I gotta be honest, I listen to everything. Metal, especially at the time of making Murder Falcon, the 80s metal, even the more like the party metal, or more of that 80s obnoxious misogynistic shred for lack of a better way to put it. Has not aged great, but man, it's really fun to listen to. But there were some bands that so Racer X was huge for me, and I don't know, it's it's brash. It's really fun though. It's really fun. It's technically proficient. I love playing hard to play music. That's really exciting to me. And you know, it just gets me pumped, you know, like, and I go through phases. Like I'm in a folk phase right now, like mandolin and violin and stuff. But I still love a good ripper. So, you know, I actually, there's a new pallbearer coming out. I guess they're releasing a new track soon, like this week. So that's gonna be really exciting.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of Power Trip.
Oh, they're freaking awesome, dude.
Dude, they're amazing. And actually, I brought their. So I saw Riley is their singer, or frontman, or whatever it's called. And I saw him like on an episode of like What's in Your Bag on YouTube, like that show where they go and they buy stuff.
Yeah, the record store show,
Yep,
right? Yeah.
Yep. And he bought a bunch of comics, and I was like, oh, he likes comics. So in like late 2017, I brought him a bunch of comics, and we connected. And he's like, dude, you draw comics? That's so cool. And he's like really into the indie scene. And so he was like throwing all these names out about like these indie comic artists. I was like, oh shoot, I don't know any of these people. But he was like, dude, I really like Murder Falcon. It's really wholesome. So every time whenever they tour through Chicago, he hits me up and we hang out. And I ask him about heavy metal stories, and he tells me about how mean Anthrax was to him.
Oh,
Nice.
I saw them live with Slayer in 2018. I gotta say, like, I mean, it was cool. I got to say I could see Anthrax, whatever. But you know, then Lamb of God and Slayer played, and it was just like a forgotten memory.
Well, it's funny because he'll ask me to dish on like, you know, comic book people, and I'm like, well, I don't know, I don't have much drama. And then he's like, well, there was this one time. Just starts going in on metal bands. So shout out to Riley. Thanks for your music, bro.
Well, Dan, we have officially hit 6:55 and the end of your time with us. So I just want to say thank you so much for hanging out with us for this little bit and giving us some of your time. And thank you very much for the work you're putting out. I mean, the passion is just on every page you produce. And
I really appreciate that, guys.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things that's drawn me personally to your work is it's just so obviously a labor of love and not just somebody churning out a project, you know, to get paid. There's just keep them coming, man. That's all I can say. I truly appreciate it.
Thanks so much for those words. It means a lot that reads, because that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make each project special. So,
well, you're succeeding. So, but anyway, that's the end of our time. This has been episode 89 of the Comic Watchers Show. Our guest this week has been Daniel Warren Johnson of Wonder Woman Dead Earth and a lot of other awesome freaking comics. I'm Matt. This is Nick. That's Mike. And this has been our show this week. Thank you so much for listening. Stay metal. Support your local comic shop. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much, guys.